If I were to pick the most important element of health and safety management, it would definitely be risk assessment. They help us identify what hazards in the workplace may harm us and help us develop a plan on how we protect people from those hazards. This plan will help us figure out more or less every element of our health and safety management system, including what equipment we should use, what training we need to provide, and what needs to be in our policies. The good news is that you do risk assessment every single day. It's an essential part of being alive and staying that way. When you cross the road, you look left and right to check no cars are going to hit you before you cross. When you're having a brew, you check that it's not too hot and maybe give it a blow before you drink it. When you see someone walking towards the thermostat, you jump up and stop them to protect your wallet. As a human being, you're constantly looking for hazards and looking for ways to avoid them from causing you harm. You are essentially completing a risk assessment each time you do this. And being at work is no different. You're exposed to things that can cause you harm all of the time whilst you're working. And just like in your day-to-day, these need to be identified and controlled to reduce the risk of causing you harm. The difference is, whilst you're at work, assessing risk goes beyond self-preservation and becomes a legal requirement. And that's for a great reason. When you're at work, you are put in a situation where you are exposed to hazards that you wouldn't usually be exposed to in normal life. And as such, your employer has a duty of care to protect you from those hazards. So, in the workplace, we can't just look around and use our common sense to avoid hazards. Employers must hit a selection of legal requirements that we need to hit, and in order to do that, we need to take a structured approach to carrying out risk assessments. The HSE recommends that we follow 5 steps to risk assessment. 1. Identifying the hazards. As mentioned a moment ago, every workplace contains a range of hazards which have the potential to cause harm to you or your workers. The first step of any risk assessment is to identify all of the hazards involved in the task and figure out how they can harm people, so we have a clear idea of what controls we need to have in place in order to keep people safe. There are a number of ways to identify hazards. Firstly, look at the task and look at the following: the people who are undertaking the work and the processes involved, the equipment that is going to be used, the materials involved including chemicals and substances, the environment that the work is going to be carried out in. All hazards will fall into one of these 4 categories. Looking at each of them will help you identify all of the hazards. It's also worth looking at accident and incident records at this stage to see if your organisation has had issues previously with that issue. The gold rule with identifying hazards is always speak to the people who are going to be carrying out the task. These are the people who know the task and what hazards are involved, so it's essential that you get their input when identifying hazards. There's quite a bit more to identification of hazards than is in the HMC recommendations, and as such we've put together a more in-depth look at hazard identification, which you can find here. We will also be posting videos on each of the 5 steps, so don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to catch each of those, as well as tons of other videos on all things health and safety. 2. Assessing the risk. Not all hazards pose an equal risk, and some hazards will require more control measures to be put in place than others. So once you've identified all the hazards, we need to identify how likely the hazard is to cause you harm and how severe the incident would be if a hazard did cause an incident. This is generally done by ranking likelihood and severity on a scale of 1 to 5, then multiplying the numbers for each to give you a risk rating on a scale of 1 to 25. The higher the number, the more control measures that you have to put in place to manage the risk. 3. Controlling the risk. Now we have to start to think about actions we should take to lower the risk to a sensible level. In order to do this, we're legally obligated to follow the principles of prevention. The principles of prevention, or hierarchy control, set out the order in which control measures should be considered to ensure the most effective control measures are considered first. This starts with eliminating the hazard entirely. If this can't be done, we need to start looking at applying some control measures, starting with looking at ways that we could substitute the hazard with something less harmful, then putting physical barriers in place or controls to ensure adequate distance is maintained from the hazard. Next, we need to consider our administrative controls such as paperwork, site rules and policies. And finally, we consider what PPE needs to be worn. By considering measures in this order, we ensure that we consider the most effective control measures first, then add on additional weaker controls as we work down the hierarchy to further strengthen the more effective controls. 4. Record your findings and communicate them to the people doing the work. All businesses have a legal requirement to produce a risk assessment and communicate it to the people who may be affected by the hazards involved. However, once you have 5 or more people working within your business, the hazards, who may be harmed and how, and what you are doing to control the risk must be written down and communicated to the people involved in the task. Development of a risk assessment is a key part of developing a safe system of work, safe operating procedures or RAMs or whatever your business calls them. Safe systems of work provide employees with a step-by-step instruction on how to complete the task safely and integrate control measures from the risk assessment. Businesses are legally required to communicate these along with the risk assessments to the teams carrying out the work, and this is usually demonstrated by having operatives acknowledge the documents via a signature. 5. Review your controls periodically. You will need to review your risk assessment periodically to ensure they are still relevant and that the controls are still effective. A review of your risk assessment should be conducted at least annually. However, you should also review your risk assessment if there are any changes to the task or external factors such as legal requirements, as these may introduce new hazards. You should also review your risk assessments following any accident, incident or near miss, as this is an indicator that the control measures within your risk assessment are not suitable or sufficient. Over the next few weeks, we'll be taking a closer look at each of these 5 steps and doing a deep dive into how we hit all of the requirements and develop a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. So make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on. Or you could head over to our website in the link below and give us a call and we can help you with your risk assessments and your specific requirements. But for now, thanks for listening and stay safe out there.